And so I'm eager to hear from our first guest tonight, Reverend Ingrid McIntyre from Glencliff United Methodist Church and co-founder of Open Table Nashville in Nashville, Tennessee. Welcome, Reverend Ingrid.
Thank you. Can you all hear me? Should I put my... Okay, I guess I'm okay where I am. Well, thank you all so much for having me. It is a gift to be among you this evening. And just to sort of chew on the scripture a little bit and think about all that it has to say to us today. My name is Ingrid McIntyre. I am currently sitting in the Scarrett Bennett Center in Nashville, Tennessee. So I did not choose the yellow curtains behind me, just FYI. And I am originally from Nashville, which is a little bit strange. There's not many of us here that are Nashvillians, and serve in the United Methodist Church. Serve the United Methodist Church here in Nashville. I am a PK, so I'm a preacher's kid. My dad is retired. And I will share that because, well, I don't know if it's because I'm a PK, but one of the things that has hurt me in the church a lot are hollow words. So I have a hard time with preaching sometimes because to me, our hands and our feet are way better preachers than our words a lot of times. And so when people ask me to preach, it makes me a little anxious because that is not my best gift, I will say. I am way more gifted at standing in the way and disrupting things and causing good trouble and using my feet and my hands. So just bear with me as I tell you some stories and share some experiences that we've had in Nashville around survival. In 2010, I was working at the General Board of Higher Education and Ministry, which is one of the United Methodist Church's agencies. We are a global agency, and one of the areas that sort of run with our schools, colleges, and universities is our General Board of Higher Education Ministry. And after 2 years of working with bishops and presidents of universities, I just decided that this wasn't my calling. I just said it wasn't messy enough for me. I was spending a lot of the church's money in expensive restaurants and hotels and trainings and meeting with people who let me just be real honest, a lot of older white men who held a lot of power in the church. And it didn't feel like I was living into my calling at all that God had put on my life. And so I quit my job. I am as now, what are we calling ourselves now? Childless cat ladies. So I am I'm a proud childless cat. And I don't even own cats because I'm allergic to them. So I said I must actually be from the devil if I'm a childless catless lady. But I quit my job, not knowing what the security would be, but knowing that this wasn't it for me and that God had more and different things for me to do. And so strangely enough, a month after I quit my job, there was a giant flood in Nashville, one larger than we had seen in 100 years at least. And of course, the folks that it affected most were people who were living by the rivers, people who were living by tributaries, people who were living under bridges. And I had begun to build some relationships with folks just by going and hanging out. And so when the flood happened, I called some friends and I went immediately to the Red Cross shelter where these folks were hanging out. And nobody really knew what to do. But one thing that we saw was that a lot of Nashville was being served during the time of the flood. But what we didn't see were people serving our friends who were the most vulnerable, right? And so, several of us said, we're just going to be here and we're going to walk with you. We don't know what this looks like, but your home has been destroyed. There was 14 feet of water that came up into one of the largest encampments in Nashville and flooded out easily over 50 encampments. And so all of these people were displaced from their homes, just like everybody else had been displaced from their home. But there weren't a lot of resources, right? And when I was reading the scripture and it said, and 500 people were walking towards Jesus, and it's like, I know this it's like, oh, what do you do, right? All these folks are coming towards you, and you know that they have needs and you don't know what to do. But instead of freaking out, instead of, Philip has this scarcity mentality, where are we going to get this food? And we all know those people, right? We all know Phillips in our lives. And then even Andrew is the naysayer, like, oh, this little kid has 2 fish and 5 loaves, right? And he's like, what's that gonna do? And we all know those people too. How is this little child going to serve in this giant catastrophe that we're experiencing right now? But to me, that child became an organizer, right? That young boy became an organizer, because if we sort of flip the script and look at this scripture a little bit differently, and not like this miraculous multiplication, right? That everybody's like, ooh, how did that happen? But what about these 5,000 people that had come for the Passover, right? All bringing things with them on this journey. All bringing things, not enough alone for anyone. Just like in Nashville, Tennessee, the 3 or 4 of us who had gathered in this space to hear stories and to accompany folks who had just lost their homes, none of us had what it took. But when we reached out and we started talking to our friends and saying, what do you have? And we called another pastor and we said, do you have vans? And we called 3 other churches and said, do you have gymnasiums that have showers? And we called another community group and said, can you make meals for the next 6 weeks? And we called another, and it reminded me of the loaves and fishes, right? It reminded me that we ourselves are the loaves and fishes, and that when gathered and when asked what our gift is, what can we bring? It is enough. It is enough. And we don't have to be, I am not a wealthy person. I am wealthy in other ways besides finances, right? But I am not a financially wealthy person. And it would have been lovely if I could have said, let's build a new apartment complex for these folks. But that's not what it was at all. And it was hard work, working together, working against a system, right? Working against the empire, working against Pharaoh, working against Caesar, working against the powers that be, that in the end, just like in this, one of the craziest parts of the scripture to me is when they said, surely this is the prophet who's come into the world, and they wanted to make him king. And Jesus was like, I'm not having any part of that. I am not your king, right? I am your Messiah. I am not your king, which is pretty amazing. Like, no king, also no leftovers. This was the sustainability of the movement, I think, right? Was that Jesus said, we cannot waste a single bit of this. Every single thing that you have brought to the table is so rich and important. Every single one of you that comes to the table is so rich and important. Every gift that you bring to move forward with momentum in this movement of abundance. Like, get behind me, Satan, right? Philip, there is plenty here. There is plenty here. And when we can all sit together in this beautiful, I just imagine this lush green meadow, which is a little strange because a lot of times when you think about Jesus moving through the world, you think of desert spaces, right? But somehow there was this giant green patch where everybody could sit on like a carpet, right? After they had been traveling. So this vision a vision that's not this miraculous multiplication, but more that one that subverts an oppressive economy that is based on individualism and brings forth a community of solidarity. This is what we need in our community. This is what I need in my community. For me and for my friends, for the people that are working for a more abundant society where the naysayers are shut down, right? Or showed that there is plenty, where people who are worried about liability are amazed, right? Liability is what, I mean, I get it, and it's one of my most unfavorite things to hear. Every time that there feels like there's a solution or a vision or somebody is coming up with a way to bring life more abundantly, somebody will say, oh yeah, but what about the liability? Let's figure out a way around that, right? We can figure out a way around that. To me, that just means, to me, that's sort of like Philip saying, well, we will never have enough. There will never be enough. Well, there is already enough, right? And how are we doing that? So I think that like we hold the answers in this space where fear is abundant, right? We are hearing the rhetoric of fear so strongly right now in our world, and for good reason, right? But also we have to find our way through that, and just to say, well, our liability isn't enough, or there's not enough food, or, well, don't you know that person, they're never going to do that. Those are not answers that we can accept anymore. Those were not answers that we accepted in Nashville, Tennessee, when people said, well, we're closing down this encampment because it's not safe. Well, you know what's not safe is when people don't have housing, and when people don't even have an encampment to go to at night where they can keep their things, where they can keep their medications, where they have community, where they are each other's security, right? So the flood that was the natural disaster that we had, and we are now, we're in 2024, so we're 14 years in, and Open Table Nashville was the first group in Nashville as we began gentrifying in Nashville that really saw gentrification was happening, and that was really asking questions around housing and not about complaining about homelessness, right? We were saying, no, this isn't a homeless issue. This is a housing issue. So let's refocus what we're looking at, sort of like this. This isn't a scarcity issue with the food. This is a perspective issue of thinking that the one person in charge has to provide it for everyone, instead of all of us being in this together and bringing our pieces. We had another, after Open Table started, and we had been going for about 10 years, another crisis really occurred to us. And that was that more and more of our folks were dying on the streets. They were dying because they didn't have what they needed, right? And somehow somebody was telling them that those things weren't accessible, those things weren't available, things that keep us alive. And I sort of refuse to believe that, because I know that they are available here in Nashville, Tennessee. And so how do we make them available to all people? So we built a place called the Village at Glencliff, which is a medical respite for people. Instead of being discharged to the streets, they're discharged to micro homes, where there's a community of people to make sure that they have healthy food that matches the diet of whatever issue they're dealing with. They have somebody to take them to the doctor, or they have somebody to make sure that they have clean laundry. And again, this wasn't something where the city was like, that sounds great, right? You guys should definitely do that. We're behind you all the way. It was something that we had to scrape together by ourselves. Of course, we had NIMBYism, and people in our neighborhood, my neighborhood where I live, where the church is, said, we don't want these people coming into our neighborhood. And so we went all the way to the state Supreme Court, and we won. And now there's people who are living in homes and not having to go and heal from an open heart surgery under a bridge, who are not having to heal from hip replacement on a bench. And it's not because I'm an amazing executive director. It's because our community has come together and said, scarcity no more. This is not the space that we're living in. We are crowd sharing now, right? We're creating models of mutual aid. And instead of counting on the emperor, the king, the government, whatever ruling class, we've said we are going to figure this out on our own. And we are not going to rely on the powers that be to take care of us, because it's not happening, right? It's not working. So let's gather our 5,000 together. And let's spread the word that, do you guys know the story of stone soup? Is that a Southern story, or is that everyone? Where there's a pot of water and people just say, the lady says, well, I'm just going to put my celery in here, right? And then the guy from a couple houses down said, well, I just gleaned from the farmer down the road and I got about 5 potatoes and a couple carrots. And so he put it up. And pretty soon this community has a soup that's so rich and is feeding their entire community, not because they called the caterer, but because they all put their piece in the pot and they all made it rich and delicious and nourishing for each other. And so I think that our call is to never turn back, right? Like we heard, never turn back, that we keep pressing forward, that we not listen to the naysayers and the people who are preaching scarcity, but that we say in each other, we find abundance. And we will continue to build relationships, and we will continue to share love that will certainly outshine fear every time, right? When we keep moving forward together. So I would say that our survival is in each other. Our survival is in each other. And when we gather just like this, or when we gather, I'm at a gathering right now for the African American Policy Forum. When we gather like that, anytime we gather and we say, together we are so much better than any of us could be by ourselves. And in this story, that is shown, right? And then when the powers say, oh, you guys can do it, take charge. No. Right? We don't need to be the king. We don't need to be the pharaoh. We don't need to call all the shots. We are going to just be community and be here for each other. Certainly, I find that the strongest in those who have the least to lose and the most to gain. My church is a congregation of about 35 people who either live on a fixed income or have no income at all. And this was the church on 6 acres of land inside Nashville, Tennessee, who said, we'll take this risk, right? We'll go up against the state Supreme Court. We will partner with people in Nashville, Tennessee, and say, we believe that the dignity of humanity is living in homes, and certainly your life is worth that. We do not have a fiscally responsible model, which I kind of love. We don't think that people need to be discharged from our program until we have them in permanent housing. It is not a fiscally responsible model, but it's breaking a cycle of poverty, right? And so to me, and with our 5,000 around us, we are able to provide abundance in a space where people have felt such scarcity. So I would say, just to wrap up our stories, that we here in Tennessee, which I don't know if you follow politics very closely, but we're in trouble here in Tennessee. We are in trouble here in Tennessee. And but moving backwards is not an option. right? Forward together, not one step back. And so here is what we are here to do. And I'm just thankful to be among all of you this evening, who share in that spirit of abundance, who share in that spirit of beyond the rest of the community's doubt, we are going to make this happen. And that really, I mean, as simplistic as it is, that love wins, right? That when we come together and we each bring our piece, that we can be whole. So I give you thanks and look forward for the other stories of survival within this group.